Seems like the interest in AK pattern shotguns is just through the roof lately, and believe me, I get it. They are probably one of the most fun guns that there are to shoot, aside from getting your hands on something that's full auto. If you're a first-time buyer, there's something that you really need to keep in mind, and that is issues with reliability. Now, I'm not saying that every one of these guns straight out of the box, regardless of manufacturer, is going to be a fail. I mentioned this before, and quality control seems to be hit and miss with these guns, regardless of who manufactures them. Some people tend to get lucky. You know, they buy one and they're shooting birdshot right out of the gate, no problems whatsoever. Other people, though, spend what seems like forever doing various modifications, using different tuning methods to try to get their gun to run the way that they expect it to run. If you already own one of these guns, chances are you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hopefully, though, I can share a little bit of my personal experience to help you save a little bit of time, money, and frustration. Today's video is all about AK shotgun tuning for reliability. Now, the most common and unrealistic advice that's out there to get your shotgun to run birdshot reliably is to use a ridiculous amount of buckshot or slugs, basically high brass rounds, to break it into the point that it will feed reliably with the lower brass birdshot. First off, that's the most expensive advice that you're going to hear on the internet. Good luck finding enough slugs, let alone affording enough slugs to go ahead and break in your shotgun the way that people are telling you to do it. Prices through the roof, availability is damn near zero right now, so you're just going to be wasting your time and money. Regardless of cost, at the end of the day, that particular procedure may not actually break your gun in enough to feed the way that you expect it to feed. It may take just a little bit more work than running some high brass rounds through it. There are two very common reasons why an AK pattern shotgun won't reliably feed cheap target loads. First is going to be friction. Second is going to be not enough gas coming through the gas system. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a Vepr or a Sega or a Cheetah or one of the new Kalashnikov USAs. Doesn't matter what the manufacturer are. Those two reasons are generally going to be why your gun's not functioning right. If you're not getting enough gas through the gas system and you've got too many rough spots on contact surfaces causing friction, it is not going to cycle well enough for that birdshot to do the trick. The action is just going to slow way down and cause all kinds of issues. So let's start with the gas system. Now, like most semi-automatic rifles, your barrel has a series of holes on top that coincide with a series of holes in the gas block, which allows the gas to travel up into the gas block and cycle the action. If your gas block is skewed either left or right by just a degree or two, it is enough to choke off the gas and not allow enough to make it through the system to actually make the weapon perform. If by some chance those holes are clogged up with carbon deposits, again, it's going to choke off enough gas that it's not going to work the way it's supposed to. Again, quality control is a key issue here. When these holes were drilled at the factory, if they weren't drilled just right and the gas block wasn't installed perfectly, you're going to have nothing but issues. Now, I'm not going to take mine apart. This Chaos quad rail is a real so-and-so to get off of there. But what you can do is you can go ahead and remove your gas tube, strip everything apart, and once you take the gas puck out of the block, you can actually see down inside of the gas block to the actual holes for the barrel. At that point, you can go ahead and shine a flashlight up the barrel, look through here, and you can actually get a good idea of how well the holes for the gas block and the barrel are lined up. You can tell if they're offset. You can tell if there's carbon deposits in there. You can tell if one or more of those holes did not get drilled out properly. Now, there are plenty of videos out there showing you what to look for with your gas system. So I'm not going to go ahead and strip mine down right now. But if you shine a flashlight up the barrel and you look into your gas system and you see that something's not quite right, I would definitely take this thing into a qualified gunsmith to have them do some work with your gas block. That's one I don't necessarily recommend that you do yourself unless you've got plenty of experience doing stuff like this. Sometimes it's worth it to take it to somebody else to work on. Friction. It's a real mood killer, but it's also the primary reason why these guns tend to underperform when it comes to weak ammo. Anytime you have two surfaces that move back and forth across each other, there's always going to be a certain level of friction that builds up. That's science. What you're looking for is rough spots on the metal. You're looking for uneven surfaces on anything that is going to be moving across another surface. If things are uneven and rough on moving surfaces, what's going to happen is your action is going to slow down and you're going to have nothing but problems trying to fire cheap target loads. For this part, you're going to need a little bit of sandpaper. My recommendation is for you to pick up a little bit of 180 grit, 320 grit, 600, some 1000 grit. Just for shits and giggles, get yourself some 1500. The 180 and 320, I'd probably use dry sandpaper. The rest of them, I'd go ahead and get the wet sand. Remember, we're looking to smooth out rough surfaces. So wet sanding tends to work wonders when it comes to doing this, especially when it comes to the fine grit sandpaper. It's going to clog up less and it's going to last you a lot longer when you're in there sanding everything out. So we're going to start inside of the receiver. Now, you have a rail on each side here, and the top surface and the inside surface, a lot of times on both of these, will be a little bit rough. These are really easy to do your sanding on. Go ahead and feel this surface. If you're feeling any rough spots or any unevenness, you can go ahead and take that 180 and sand it out. Remember, it is absolutely vital that you don't take off more material than you have to. You just want to take that 180, give it a good once over to smooth it out, switch over to the 320, do the same. Next, move over to 600, go over it for a while, grab that 1000 grit, go over it even more, take your 1500, do your final polish work on it, and what you should come up with is this rail should be absolutely smooth, glass-like. Sanding out these inner rails did more to help the function of my gun than anything else, to be perfectly honest. I had already sanded several other areas, polished it out, and it wasn't until I got these nice and smooth that the gun actually started to function the way that I expected it to. Another spot that you're going to want to focus on is the hammer. Of course, I don't think that the camera is going to pick it up, but the hammer actually has 3 flat surfaces. 1, 2, 3. Whatever you do, do not change the geometry of this hammer because you're just going to give yourself more issues down the road. There are high quality drop-in trigger and hammer replacements that you can go ahead and put in. That's probably going to be the easiest way to deal with this. I found that my particular gun had a really rough patch right here. Now when the gun cycles, this hammer of course is forward and the action comes back. It actually glides across this surface to push this hammer back down and cycle. Unfortunately, this rough patch right here was slowing it down quite a bit, so I had to get out the 180 and I had to very carefully sand this out with the 180 and the 320 and the 600 and yada yada. But again, do not change the geometry of this hammer because it's just going to screw you over in the long term. So generally they don't put a lot of work into the finish work on these bolt carriers. Usually when they come out, all of the surfaces are extremely rough. There's a lot of unevenness on there. A lot of people ask me why I polished this. Honestly, for the most part, it's for the look. It looks badass. That's all there is to it. What's important is what's going on underneath. Now, again, as this rides back and forth, this is the surface that does all the work. This is the surface that is pushing the hammer back down to reset so that you can go ahead and take your next shot. Out of the box, mine was extremely rough. This surface right here was very uneven. There were a lot of rough spots. It definitely was not glass smooth. This part's important. The geometry of this right here cannot be changed. If this gets sanded out and it is not the same geometric pattern, again, you're going to give yourself more of a headache than you want. So bust out that 180 and be very careful not to change the shape of this and just sand it down with the 180, move over to the 320, then wet sand with 600, 1000, and 1500. And what you're going to find is that this will get nice and smooth. You're basically going to cut down most of the friction that you end up getting that slows down the action by smoothing this out. Again, we're not taking off a lot of material. All of those high spots, all of those rough spots, we're just smoothing them out. That's it. Now on the inside of the receiver, we went ahead and we polished out those rails. Those rails slide back and forth through these slots right here. I didn't touch these. I didn't put any work into these whatsoever because I really didn't want to take off too much material on the inside and then have an issue where I'm getting some wobble in there or any type of weird movement. I went ahead and relied on the polish work that I did on the rails and just kind of let this sort itself out. As long as the rails are nice and glass smooth, this is going to travel back and forth as smoothly as possible. So as far as the carrier goes, this is the important part. Get this nice and smooth. Don't worry about any of this side stuff. There's really nothing going on there as far as contact points. It's all in this right here. If you can smooth out this portion of the carrier and you can smooth out the hammer and those two rails on the inside, that should clear up the majority of the issues that you're having. So that's it. If your gas system checks out and you've smoothed out all of the rough contact surfaces, you're ready to go ahead and go out and test your work. Be generous with your lubrication. I stick to Lucas gun oil, but use whatever it is that you like to use. Now take that shotgun out and try to run a couple mags worth of birdshot through it. Depending on the job that you did sanding everything down, it may work exactly as expected. Maybe it won't. If it doesn't, you can open it up, you can take a look, and you can see the spots that are still rubbing together. It's going to give you a better idea of where it is that you need to go home and put in more work with the sandpaper. It took me 3 or 4 times taking my gun out and testing it before I knew that I had it right. Remember, you aren't looking to remove a lot of material. All you're wanting to do is smooth out those surfaces so that everything just glides back and forth as it was intended to. Now, I could list off a half dozen websites that sell reliability packages for all of these guns. Almost every one of these reliability packages consists of lighter weight springs, and for some guns that does help. The only thing you want to keep in mind is that a lighter weight spring is not intended for anything other than birdshot. If you swap over to one of those lighter springs and then you go to run some buckshot through there, chances are you could end up damaging your receiver. Personally, I'd look at swapping springs as a last resort kind of thing. If I can put in a couple of hours wet sanding and I can get my gun to run the way that I want it to, well, then I can shoot buckshot, I can shoot birdshot, I can shoot slugs, I can shoot anything in between and not have any issues. If I go straight to swapping out springs, then I'm stuck with shooting nothing but birdshot or potentially damaging my gun when I'm shooting heavier rounds. I'm going to go with the time that it takes to polish out the parts on my gun. That couple of hours to me is well worth the versatility that I'm getting from it versus going to swapping out springs. So that's it. Take your gun apart, take a good strong look at it. Go ahead and sand out some of those rough spots, polish it up real good, take it out to the range, test fire it, see how it functions. Maybe you take it home and do a little bit more polish work, who knows. I think you're going to find that this particular technique is going to save you a lot of time and money over, putting 500 to 1,000 rounds of buckshot through your gun to be able to break it in, which, by the way, I tried that with the Vepr and it didn't do anything for me. Still had to go back to polishing everything out. So I don't know. The choice is yours. Give it a shot.